We had discussed yesterday that one of the things that J.S. Mill is most famous for is his defense of the right to speech and expression, is his defense of people's right to get their voices heard. Now, his views have been very divergent as compared to some of the other people of his times, be it on freedom of expression, be it on rights on education of women, etc. But his views with respect to who shall be given the right to speak and who shall be given the right of not to speak, all these are extremely important. For example, he famously said, all silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. Let me tell you what exactly is this. So, the simple argument that he gave was, let's say in a society, there are 100 people. Out of the 100 people, 99 of them have one single view. Let's say 99 people say that we should go on a war. And if there's only one single individual who is of the opposite view, if one single individual says that no, let's not go on a war, it will lead to some trouble, it will lead to issues, etc. As per J.S. Mill, even if only one single person in the society has a contrasting view as compared to the majority, even then, that single individual has the right to be heard. Even then, that one single individual should be given the respect, should be given the opportunity to put his or her points across. He was such a big supporter of freedom of speech and expression. You see what is happening, and not this one, but if you look at how the last Lok Sabha functioned. In the last Lok Sabha, for example, a lot of bills were just passed within a few minutes. In Indian polity, all of you would have read about the different stages of passing of the bill. The first stage is the introduction part, where just the introduction happens. The member of the parliament takes permission to get the bill printed and he just introduces the bill. Then we have the second stage, that is usually the committee stage, where the bill is given to a committee. They discuss the bill in and out, they discuss what are the provisions of the bill, how exactly the law will function. And then the third stage is when there is voting on the bill. That is the usual progression of a bill. But in the last Lok Sabha, because we had such overwhelming numbers in the majority side, that the government, most of the bills were not given to the committee. Very few bills went to the committee. The second stage was completely eliminated, and the bills were introduced and they were just passed within a few minutes. And there were many important bills. For example, Derek O'Brien, who is a member of the Lok Sabha, was a member of Lok Sabha in the last Lok Sabha also from Trinamool Congress, Derek O'Brien had said that today in the parliament the bills are passed quicker than how a chartwala can make a chart at his shop. And that is his quote, that within a few minutes you can't even make a chart in that many minutes, but the government is passing important laws in that many minutes. So what was government doing? Government was basically arguing on the fact that since we have the majority, those who are against us, anyways, whatever they say doesn't matter. So even if they are not allowed to speak, we are not breaking any law. That was the government's argument, that we are not breaking any law as long as we have the majority, we will pass whatever law. And they were not wrong in that sense. That is the entire idea of majority. When you have the majority, obviously you will do whatever you want. Obviously you will pass the law. But this is what J.S. Mill was against. He was against this idea that people in the minority should not be allowed to speak. He was a great supporter of civil liberties and individual freedom. He was of the view that freedom of speech and expression actually puts a lot of pressure on the government, and that is why maybe the governments want to restrict that. He said that he must not be, or anyone who should not be denied of this right, even if it is against the majoritarian view or accepted social norms. Meaning that even if you think that your social norms are against, or your social norms do not allow you to follow a certain view, even if you are against the entire society, even then you should be allowed to have your own view. It is not that you should not be allowed to express that. It may or may not be accepted, that's a different matter altogether, but you should be allowed to actually say that. Now, let me give you an example. I was thinking about it yesterday, and again, uh, don't think of it as I'm comparing the two things, but just I was just thinking yesterday itself. Um, You saw what happened in the US. Donald Trump, there was an assassination attempt on him. So there was a young boy, 20 years old, who tried to kill Donald Trump, and by the grace of God, he was saved. And apparently, he was saved just by a few inches, not even 1 inch. In fact, a quarter of an inch. He was saved. The bullet hit his ears. He fell down, but there was no other harm. You would have seen that he was giving a speech campaigning. Now, this 20-year-old who had fired the gun, who he was killed on the spot, obviously by the security forces. I was thinking yesterday that 20-year-old who was killed, there is a family of that 20-year-old, right? There are parents of that 20-year-old. His parents are still living. I won't say a normal life, but his parents are still living. Means you don't see people going into the house of those of the parents of the kid and saying that we will kill you. How dare you had a son like this? How dare your son try to do this to our leader? I was just imagining, can you imagine something similar to that in India? Again, I don't want to imagine that, but just a thought that I had in my mind. Can you imagine something like this in India? Let's say a man targets a very big political leader. Okay, very big political leader is targeted. Now, that political leader survives, but the shooter is killed. Think about what will happen to the family members of that shooter. Will those family members be even allowed to be safe? Will those family members, and I'm not saying the police, etc., but I'm just saying the common public, the supporters of that big leader, would they allow that person or the family of that person to be safe or to actually exist? Again, that's a random thought that I had in my mind to connect to this. That what he said was that anyone who does not accept the social norms, anyone who might have a view that is contrary to you, should be allowed to tell their views, because if not, it will lead to the tyranny of the majority. If you do not allow people to have their contrasting views, it will lead to tyranny of the majority, which will pose a threat to the liberty. He said that having a public opinion is extremely, extremely, extremely important. It makes sure that the government is in control. It makes sure that the government is in the habit of listening a contrasting viewpoint as well. You are not allowing the government to just randomly decide whatever kind of policies they want. You are telling the government that there are people who are watching over you. He famously said, and I just explained this only, if all humankind or if all mankind versus or minus one were of one opinion, and only one person is of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. I sometimes wonder, can the people in our times also write in this flowery language? The exact same thing could have been written in a much easier manner, much simpler manner. But again, Tanmay saying, yes, Tanmay, you are right. In fact, not just him, there are many other people who are in, who I won't say like him, but there are some people who are in the jail on terrorism charges. They have also even won and they have also been in power. Anyways, so the same thing that we discussed, as per J.S. Mill, anyone, even if there's one single person who has a contrasting point of view as compared to the entire society, even then that one single person should be allowed to speak. The government should not overlook even that one single person. And the idea is simple. You never know from where a good idea can originate. Let me ask you this question. There is a concept of private member bill, right? What is a private member bill in India? And also tell me how many private member bills have been passed in India? Tell me what is a private member bill in India and how many private member bills have been passed in India, if ever? Since there's a lag, I'll wait for a few seconds. What is a private member bill and how many of them have been passed in India? That is my question. Yes, Prabhat, you can speak now.
So, any bill that has been not introduced by or have been put forth by a cabinet member is a private member's bill. And
Are you sure cabinet member is the right word?
I mean, not a minister is what
Right.
that.
Right. Not all the ministers are cabinet members.
Yes, sir. So that is not the right word. So a bill that is not tabled by a minister, it can be
Mm-hmm.
an opposition member or any member.
Mm-hmm.
That is a private bill. And how many have been passed? So I do not exactly remember. I have
Mm-hmm.
written this in my copy, but I think so far two or three have been passed.
Okay. Dhyana has given the correct answer in the chat. No worries. 14 have been passed so far. 1-4. Correct. English. Perfect. So, as he rightly said, and I'll just correct Karthik also in the chat, don't confuse a cabinet member with a minister. You would have read this in Indian polity. Not all the ministers are cabinet members. If there are, let's say, 80 ministers, there are different types of ministers that we have in India. At the very top, let's say the top 15 to 20 ministers, they are the cabinet ministers only. Like Home Minister, Finance, Defense. These are the ones that are called the cabinet ministers. But others also are ministers. So private member bill, as you people rightly said, a bill introduced by a non-minister is a private member bill. So far, only 14 of them have been passed. The most interesting fact here is if you look at the 14 private member bills that have been passed, the last ones were passed in 1970s. Means since 1970s, no private member bill has been passed. Now, please understand what I'm trying to tell you here. The definition is private member bill means a bill introduced by a non-minister. In reality, what you mean by private member bill is a bill of the opposition. That is what you mean. Because let's say BJP is in power, so whatever law the BJP wants to make, it will be their ministers only that will introduce the bill. So if you're in the government, the bill that you introduce are usually almost always by the ministers only. Let's say if a bill or a law related to railways has to be made, the railway minister only will introduce the bill. If a law about India's foreign policy has to be made, foreign minister only will introduce the bill. So from the government side, it is the ministers only that introduce the bill usually. So when you say non-minister introducing the bill, what you actually mean to say is it is the opposition members who are introducing the bills. Now imagine since 1970s, not even one such bill has been passed by the parliament that has been introduced by an opposition member. For example, if you see every single session in the Lok Sabha in the past few sessions, Shashi Tharoor, who is a Congress member, has been introducing multiple bills. So in the last Lok Sabha also, Shashi Tharoor introduced multiple bills. He knows it will not be passed, but he still introduces them. Even before that, now the question that I have here is, the government is assuming that only those who are in power have good ideas. How is that possible? Like, the monopoly of good ideas is not only with the majority side, right? Good ideas can come in from anywhere. The opposition members can also have some good ideas. People who are not in majority can have some good ideas. So the assumption that the government makes that good ideas can only be from our side, and that is why we will not take up any of the bills from the opposition member, that is a big problem. This is what JS Mill is referring to here as well. That the majority's assumption that only they have the right to have good ideas or only they have the mind to bring in good ideas, that is a big problem. You cannot have that. The good idea can come in from anywhere, and that is why people should be allowed to speak whatever they want. Now, one of the other very interesting things that JS Mill had talked about was, when is it that the government's interference should be allowed? I'll just write it down. When government interference should be allowed. Under what circumstances should the government be allowed to restrict your liberty? That is a big question. So J.S. Mill talks about two categories of actions. He says there are two types of actions that any human being performs. One is self-regarding action, and the other is called the other regarding action. Now, please try and understand this. As per J.S. Mill, Self-regarding action means any action that has no impact on anyone else except you. An action that has no consequence for anyone, it will only impact you and no one else. Let's take an example. When you are riding a car, you are not wearing a seat belt. Okay, when you're not wearing a seat belt, the impact of if you get in an accident will be only on you, right? You not wearing a seat belt has no consequence on anyone else. So not wearing a seat belt while driving will be called a self-regarding action. Self-regarding action again means it has no impact on anyone else. I'm not writing it because in the next slide I've defined it. So just listen to this. Self-regarding means it has no impact on anyone else. Other regarding action means when it has an impact on others. Let's take the same example. When you're driving a car, there is a speed limit that is imposed on different roads. Because if you go beyond the speed limit, you are prone to getting into an accident. When you get into an accident, you will harm others as well and not just you. That becomes an other regarding action. Other regarding action means when there is a consequence of your action on others as well. J.S. Mill says government interference should be allowed only in this category. He says that government interference should be allowed in this category only, means only if there is an action whose consequence will be for others as well and not just you. If there's an action where you only alone would not have to pay the cost, others also have to pay the cost, others will also be impacted, that is an others regarding action, and for that the government interference should be allowed. This is how he defines these actions. Now we will go into a greater detail of it because there are many arguments that in the entire world there is nothing called a self-regarding action actually, and we'll discuss that in just a bit. He basically says that self-regarding action, again as you say, are those which do not interfere with anyone else, that would have an impact only on you. So he basically makes a distinction, or he understands the difference between thought and expression. J.S. Mill says that these are two different things. For example, he says thought is self-regarding. Let's understand this. Just a simple example so that you can all understand this. Tanmay, yes, this argument can be used to support, not support, but yes, you can argue to justify euthanasia, etc. So basically, he says that the thought is self-regarding. For example, in your mind, you can think anything. Let's say there's an individual that you really hate. Okay, there's an individual who did something wrong to you. You hate this individual. You don't like him. You can have whatever thoughts in your mind that you have about him or her. I always tell this to people that if God gives you a chance today, that you can do whatever you want to only one individual in the entire world, you all know which individual you'll want to harm, right? Now I don't know who that individual is, but I'm very sure almost everyone in the world has that one single individual they really want to do something bad to. Maybe they did something wrong to you as a kid, now as an adult, maybe you just had a fight, but there'll always be someone who you want to hurt. If you have this thought in your mind, as per J.S. Mill, that is not bad. You can have whatever thought in your mind because just having a thought is not impacting them. So as per J.S. Mill, freedom of thought is a self-regarding action, right? Because you just thought about it, there's no issue with that. But when you express the same, when you actually put that into words and you say something like that, means when you express it, that can be dangerous because that can have implications on the others. For example, if I really hate someone, I keep it within me, no issues with that, no one will come to know. But if I say this openly out aloud that I hate this person, maybe someone will try to harm him, maybe someone just wants to impress me and then they end up harming them. So as per J.S. Mill, While freedom of thought is self-regarding action, meaning it should not have any restriction, freedom of expression, on the other hand, can have some consequences. So it is an others regarding action. So he says that freedom of thought and expression basically can be others regarding, but you have to give liberty to people to express as well. Because if you don't give the liberty to people to express their thoughts, then there's no point of thinking. I'll repeat what I just said. J.S. Mill understands the difference between freedom of thought and freedom of expression, because freedom of thought has no impact on others, while freedom of expression has an impact on others. So J.S. Mill says that in an ideal world, freedom of thought should be unlimited, freedom of expression can be limited. But he says that you cannot restrict people from expressing themselves, because if you restrict people from expressing themselves, then what is the point of them thinking? So he says that freedom of thought and expression should go together, unless unless your expression is leading to someone's getting hurt, or unless your expression is leading to some kind of a violence. As you can say, according to him, state may only interfere with people holding or expressing their views if those views can cause harm to others, and even then, it should only interfere in doing so would be more beneficial than not doing so. This is very similar to how our Article 19 interprets freedom of speech and expression. Like in India, Article 19 gives you the freedom of speech and expression with certain restrictions. And if you look at those restrictions, the restrictions include, for example, public order, incitement of violence, harming India's relationship with some other country. So even in India, even in most of the democratic countries, the same logic is followed, that you have the freedom of speech and expression, but the government has a right to interfere if they think that expressing this thought may cause harm. And if the government thinks that by interfering, they can reduce this chance, or by interfering, they can reduce the chances of people getting hurt, only and only then the government should interfere. He says that there should be absolute freedom of opinion if it is scientific, moral, speculative opinion. For example, there are people who would want to criticize a government policy, right? So if you want to criticize a government policy, as per JSY, you should be allowed to do that, because you're not harming anyone. If you're harming someone, if you are taking or putting someone's life is in danger, then your freedom of speech and expression should be curtailed. Otherwise, there is no point of curtailing your freedom of speech and expression as per J.S. Mill. He gives a number of arguments in defense of this individual freedom. Even if the opinion that is made by a person is outspoken, even if it is raw, he still says that the person should be allowed to speak. Why? He gives certain arguments, he gives certain reasons. First, he says that it is possible that minority opinion may actually be true and the opinion of majority may actually be false. See, there is no guarantee that whatever a majority of the people think is right. And it has been proven so many times in history. Before Galileo said that Earth is round, everyone thought Earth is flat. So when he came up and said, no, Earth is not flat, he was the one who had a contrary opinion to almost everyone in the entire world. But still, he was proven to be correct. Similarly, whenever you have a scientific discovery, for the longest time about the universe, it was thought that everything revolves around the Earth. For the longest time, it was thought that Earth is the center of the universe and everything revolves around the Earth. But that also turned out to be false. So minority opinion can be true, and it has been proven to be true many times in the history. It is not true that only the majority opinion will be true. Second, even if we accept that majority opinion is true, let's assume that, we still should not suppress those of a contradictory view. Why? Because a truth will only be considered as a truth if it proves itself against the opposite view. Means, even if one side is speaking the truth, which is the majority side, you should still allow the other side to have their views, because only when the truth gets a chance to defend itself, only when we have a contrasting point of view can people's confidence in the truth gets further strengthened. So if for nothing else, then just to build more confidence of the people in the value of truth, we should allow people of other contrasting viewpoints also to come up and put their argument across. Mill argues in the real life it is very unlikely that an opinion rather from whichever side will be entirely true. Means he says in reality neither the majority nor the minority will be 100% true. He says in reality it has to be somewhere in the middle. And you can take the simple example about how laws are passed in the parliament. Just a second. Like for example, let's say the government is introducing a policy or the budget also. Government is introducing a budget. Now, the best budget might not be what the government wants to introduce. It might also not be what the opposition wanted to introduce. It would be something in the middle, which requires discussions, which requires debates. And for that, you have to allow the freedom of expression. This is what Mill says, that if you have to find out the best possible scenario, if you have to find out the truth, you have to allow all the different opinions to come up so that all these opinions can actually come in and speak, discuss, so that we can find out what eventually is the real truth. Then Mill also says for human development also it is important that you allow freedom of speech and expression that will allow any individual to fulfill their responsibility in the government, to fulfill their moral responsibility as well. If a state does not allow this, they will lose the sense of dignity. If the individuals think that my voice is not even being heard, what is the point of raising my voice? What is the point of telling anything? What is the point of choosing the government? That will not be good, because this is again a famous quote that J.S. Mill has given. I'll just written this quote here as well. He says, "A state which draws its men in order that they may be more docile instruments in its hands, even for beneficial purposes, will find that with small men no great things can really be accomplished." It's a quote that UPSC has asked in the past. Means if a government subdues or pressurizes its citizens to just become yes men, to agree to whatever the government says, very soon that state will realize, that government will realize that these kind of citizens cannot do any good for the country. The state will realize that if you really want to do good for the country, if you really want to progress, you must have people who have strong opinions. You must have people who are allowed to raise opinions and not really yes men who would agree to everything that the government says. This is the same quote as is given here. It says, eventually the state will realize no great things can really be accomplished with the help of subdued citizens. So if you don't allow the citizens to raise their voices, in the long run, it will only hurt the government. In the same, those who don't know the meaning of dwarf means basically men with short height, men who are vertically challenged, you can say, with small height. Those are the people who are called as dwarfs.